Hi, my name's Lisa Montgomery, writer at herheartforgod.com. I've decided to tackle the dreaded passage of 1 Timothy 2:12. This passage, more than any other, is what is used to limit women in ministry in the church. Other than this passage, there isn't much ground to stand on. And this verse, if we look at it, I'll just read it. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. 1 Timothy 2:12. And so in English, this verse appears clear. The reality, though, is in Greek, there's a lot of mystery in this passage, questions that arise looking at how it's written. And so it's okay to build a doctrine on a clear passage, but if this passage can be shown to be unclear and difficult to interpret, then we shouldn't base a major doctrine on this one passage alone. We should let other clear teachings shed light on it and how to interpret and apply this passage. And so I'm going to look at 8 reasons why I think this passage is so difficult to interpret and understand. I think this passage is far from clear. I think there's a lot of questions that it brings up. So let's look at these 8 reasons for why this passage is so hard to understand. The first reason is that there's a question as to whether this is a universal command or a command for a specific situation in the Ephesian church. The reason I bring up this question is the word used for I do not permit, the verb epitropo in Greek, isn't usually used for a universal command. So this verb is in the present active indicative in the first person. Philip B. Payne suggests that when Paul uses the first person in the present active indicative, it is to talk about his own preference. It's not to give a universal command. For example, there's the verse, because of the present crisis, I think that it is good for a man to remain as he is. 1 Corinthians 7:26. The I think is in the present active indicative, and it's his own preference. He's not saying that every man should remain celibate for their whole lives. He's giving his own opinion, his preference. And the second reason is that this word epitropo, for permit, when it's used in the Bible, usually in the first person, it's not talking about a universal command. It's talk about a permission given in the present for a specific situation. For example, there was a man that Jesus said, come follow me. He said to another man, follow me. But he replied, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. Luke 9:59. The let me go epitropo refers to a specific situation. So just because of this verb, how it is used elsewhere and how this verb tense is used elsewhere, there is reasonable doubt as to whether this is a universal command or a command given to a specific time. And if we look at the surrounding context of 1 Timothy 2, we see that there are things in there that were specific to that time and we don't apply anymore. When was the last time you saw men lifting up their hands in prayer? Or, women still go around with braids in their hair or gold and pearl necklaces, and we don't find that offensive. These were specific recommendations at that time. There might be a universal principle, but its application at that time was very specific. So that's the first question that I have when I look at this text. The second question I have is what kind of teaching? What kind of teaching is Paul forbidding? It seems like he's forbidding women to teach anything to men. Whether that be in church or society, there's no qualifications. Yet we know that women did teach men in the early church. We know that Priscilla taught Apollos. And we know that there's several passages that talk about in the church, when you come together, each one has a hymn a song, a prayer, a petition, a teaching, a prophecy. Everyone was coming together and they were all sharing in the Spirit, how the Spirit led them. They were sharing teachings. So women seemed to be involved in that, sharing teachings in the church. So what kind of teaching is Paul not permitting? There must be a qualification of some sort. And a lot of complementarians will say that, well, Paul isn't permitting a teaching with authority. That brings us to our third question. Is Paul forbidding one thing or two? So a lot of complementarians say that it's teaching with authority that Paul is forbidding. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. They combine the two, teaching and having authority over a man, into one thing. And there's good reason for that. The conjunction ude between the two, it links two things that are related, and it could be qualifying, bringing these two together into one thing. For example, in English, we have don't drink and drive. You can drink and you can drive, but you can't drink and drive both at the same time. And so that's the kind of idea. And so there are people on the complementarian side and egalitarian side that think that Paul is forbidding only one thing. So, I mean, that's a question, another question that we have when we come to this text. The fourth question is related, is what does that word translated as authority mean? So the word is authenteo in Greek, and it's been translated just as have authority or like authority in a lot of translations, such as the NLT, the ESV, and the NASB. But this isn't the most common word used for authority in the Bible. Exousia. That's not the word used. Authenteo is a special word. It only appears once in the whole New Testament. So we've had to look outside of the Bible to see how it was used elsewhere. And what we find is that often it is used for an authority that has a negative connotation. The LSJ definition is to have full power or authority over someone, or to commit a murder. And its related cognate, authentest, actually means murderer, for what that's worth. So it seems to be a dominating type of authority. The King James translated it as usurp authority. So this doesn't seem like any type of authority that even a man should practice. So of course a woman shouldn't do this. It's a very negative thing. And so is Paul forbidding women from teaching in a assuming way, in a domineering way? Is that what Paul is forbidding? Well, in that case, I mean, since men shouldn't do that either, there's no reasons to put extra limitations on women because of this verse. If authenteo is an abuse of power and authority. The fifth question I have when I come to the text is this: why does Paul go from speaking about men and women in general, in the plural, to a woman and a man in the singular? Paul says in the beginning that all men should lift up holy hands in prayer, and it says that all women should dress modestly, without braids or gold or pearl necklaces, flaunting their wealth. He's talking about men and women in plural, but in verse 11 and 12, Paul is saying, let a woman, singular, learn in quietness and full submission. However, I'm not permitting a woman from teaching or assuming authority over a man in the singular. What can explain this? Is Paul highlighting that this isn't a universal command applying to all women of the Church of Ephesus, but maybe one or a few women doing this harmful thing, teaching in a domineering way. So does that explain why he went to the singular form? I mean, who knows? It's a question that it's hard to answer. The sixth question is Paul referring to a man and woman or a husband and wife? Because in Greek, the words for man and woman also refer to husband and wife. So without any clear indication of the text, it can be hard to determine, is Paul talking about a married couple or just a man and a woman? It's hard to tell, because Paul then goes on to give the example of Adam and Eve, a married couple, the first married couple. Well, then maybe he's talking about a couple. And so this would apply to a couple and not to the whole church. Who knows? The seventh question I have is, well, are women only forbidden teaching men? As in, like, women could teach other women, or women could teach children? Well, how does that work? When does a child become a man? At 13? At 18? What should we do? I mean, surely if a woman shouldn't teach a man, then she shouldn't teach children who are not as fully developed and more prone to deception and are more easily influenced. And if a woman can teach other women, why can't she share that same exact teaching to a man? Is it the teaching that's sinful, or is it that a man is hearing it that makes it sinful? That's just it's hard to apply this passage. What do we do? Complementarians, they let women teach children, because I mean, if they didn't do so, I think that they wouldn't have enough volunteers to teach the children. And my eighth question that this text poses is about whether or not the surrounding context is clear. If the surrounding context isn't clear, then it would be hard to be able to affirm that this passage is clear. We don't understand what's going on around it. So what's the link between a woman learning and teaching? Verses 11 and 12. It's linked by the conjunction de, like but, however, and it has the same word, exousia. And so is Paul saying that you have to let the woman learn, but I'm not permitting her to then go and overpower the teacher and teach her own ideas? She should be learning first. Is that what Paul is talking about? And what about this reference to Adam and Eve? What does who being created first have to do with learning and teaching? The complementarians will argue that, well, Paul is basing this command in Genesis, grounding it in Genesis, and so making it universal for all people for all times. But complementarians think that male authority over women is clearly taught in Genesis 1 and 2. And I don't think that stands on sturdy ground. If you want to learn more, check out my video, is male authority taught in Genesis. Okay, I'll just say this. Where in the Bible does it say that God has a preference for the firstborn, that he gives a special authority to the firstborn? It's not said anywhere. Actually, God seems to make a point not to choose the firstborn. He preferred Abel's offering to Cain's, and he chose Jacob over Esau, and chose Joseph over all his other brothers, and he chose David, the youngest, out of all his other brothers as well. God makes a point of not choosing the one that society thinks should be chosen, the firstborn. So I don't think that that's an argument for male authority. That's just not taught anywhere in Scripture. In an argument that has been used a lot in the past, but not so much anymore, is that, well, women are more easily deceived, so just as Eve. And so this passage in 1 Timothy 2:14 about it not being the man being deceived, but the woman who was deceived and became a transgressor, suggesting that, well, since all women are more easily deceived, they shouldn't teach men. I mean, this is completely ridiculous. Almost no one accepts this today, even among complementarians. But we have to wonder then, why is Paul referring to Eve's deception? Was there a woman in Ephesus that was deceived, but she was propagating her false teaching? Maybe that's why Paul gave that command. It wouldn't prevent a woman from teaching sound doctrine. And lastly, what on earth does she will be saved through childbirth if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control? 1 Timothy 2:15. What on earth does that mean? If we don't understand this passage, can we really say we understand a verse that comes right before it? Are women saved because they have children? Do women have to have children to go to heaven? Of course not. So what does it mean? I mean, obviously women aren't saved from dying in childbirth. Like, even Christian people today still die giving birth to children. So what is Paul saying here? And who's they? She will be saved through childbirth if they continue in faithfulness? Was that like believers in general, or was that referring to Adam and Eve? This passage isn't clear. It might also refer to Jesus. We are all saved by the birth of one child. That child is Jesus. Is that what this passage is referring to? Possibly, but we can't be 100% sure. So there you have it. 8 reasons that come from this text that explain why this passage is so hard to understand and interpret. Complementarians and egalitarians all arrive at different interpretations. Complementarians don't agree among themselves, nor do egalitarians come to the same conclusions. And we have a wide variety of practices related to this passage. This passage is far from clear, and we need to stop putting limitations on over half the church to possibly exercise their gifts from God. This is a very harmful practice if it's not taught by scriptures. We are severely quenching the spirit. And I think it needs to stop. If you like this video, please click subscribe for more, or check out my website at herheartforgod.com. Thank you. Bye.